Good morning. My name is Nancy. Good morning. My name is Nancy Dunn Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Elizabeth McGowan Training Institute, and we're very happy to have you here today for our monthly Ask the Geriatrician webcast. We want to start by thanking the Baptist Health Foundation of San Antonio, who's a major funder of our programming. We also want to thank the Methodist Healthcare Ministries Foundation, the San Antonio Area Foundation, the Prior Trust, and the many other donors, individuals, and organizations who support the mission of mmlearn.org. Now, we always want this to be interactive. So if you look at the top of your screen, if you're viewing as part of the webcast, you're going to see a little ask function, and it looks like a comic bubble. So if you click on that and you would like to send in a question or make a comment, that will be sent directly to us here, and we'll share that with our presenter today. If you're not using that function or you're listening by phone, and we always have a good number of people who listen by phone, then you can phone in to 210-264-7000 and ask your question by phone. At the end of the webcast, we're going to take probably 10 or 15 minutes to answer any of your questions. Well, we have a very special guest with us today. His name is Dr. George Rapier. He is a geriatrician, and he's also the CEO of WellMed in San Antonio. Very well known for the important work that he does in prevention and keeping seniors and others healthy. I can speak about one of my friends, Sister Mary Jo Swift, who goes to the Elvira Cisneros Center on the south side of San Antonio, which is a gift of WellMed to the people of San Antonio. She tells me it's the greatest place in San Antonio for exercise. And I think it probably is, because if you look at her, I'm not going to give away her age, but I'm going to say that she would use a geriatrician. And she goes there on a weekly basis. It's a wonderful place. And the other thing I'd like to say about Dr. Rapier is that we'd all like for our doctors to look at prevention and to do things before we get ill. The other thing that he's been very generous in doing is doing wonderful things in San Antonio and Texas as a philanthropist. So he's well known not only here, but I know in many, many other parts of the state of Texas. The topic today is sugar and spice, not everything's a vice. If you listened to any of the news last week, you heard that diabetes is rampant in the United States, and the rate is going to triple by 2050. What we want to do is change that prediction. The most at-risk group are older adults, and we have an expert today who's going to tell us how to manage diabetes and what to do to keep that under control. So please help me welcome Dr. George Rapier.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and welcome everyone here in person, and welcome everybody that's participating on our webcast. I'd like to just give a special hello to Kami Perez and everybody that's watching from the Elvira Cisneros Senior Community Center. So hi, Kami, and everybody down there. Today I'm going to talk about diabetes, and this really, as Nancy says, is a very, very important topic. It's more prevalent the older you get, and today in the United States it's really reached critical epidemic proportions. Not only in our older population, but even in our kids. Diabetes was basically unheard of in younger people until now, but today in San Antonio, about 5% of our elementary school children have what's known as adult onset or type 2 diabetes. So it's an epidemic today. As Nancy says, the number of diabetics is projected to double by 2050. And it's really a health concern because there's many complications with diabetes as well. So knowing what to do for your diabetes if you have it is important. Knowing how to prevent it is even more important. First, there's two types of diabetes, conveniently called type 1 and type 2, so they're easy to remember. Type 1 diabetes is pretty much exclusively in young adults, and it is purely a lack of insulin produced by the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ which secretes insulin as well as another of other substances that aid in digestion. But the insulin production is necessary to take the sugar and starch that we ingest and take it out of our bloodstream and send it to the tissues, such as the liver, the brain, the muscles, the fat cells, where it can be metabolized or stored. People with type 1 diabetes generally have an autoimmune reaction where the body actually attacks the pancreas, killing the cells that make insulin. We're not exactly sure why this occurs. Some people think it may be post-viral. There's certainly some genetic predisposition to this. But in this case, the underlying metabolic problem is completely a lack of insulin, and the pancreas just gets attacked, gets destroyed, and can't make insulin anymore. Type 2 diabetes is totally different. Type 2 diabetes is generally prevalent in older people, although, like I said, 5% of our elementary school children in San Antonio now have developed type 2 diabetes. But the underlying metabolic problem in type 2 diabetes is totally different. In type 2 diabetes, the problem is insulin resistance. So the pancreas is working. The pancreas hasn't been damaged early in type 2 diabetes. But the cells in the body, predominantly the fat cells, but also to a certain extent the muscle cells, are resistant to this insulin. The problem is there are way too many receptors on the surface of these cells and way too many of these cells, so the amount of insulin that's secreted is inadequate to get the sugar out of the blood and into these cells. So early in type 2 diabetes, the problem is not lack of insulin. It's actually too much insulin is produced, but the cells that bind with the insulin are relatively resistant or immune to the action of the insulin. So type 1 diabetes we already talked about, possibly triggered by a virus, but is really an autoimmune reaction. Type 2 diabetes, everyone knows what happens from a blood sugar standpoint. We eat foods that have starch, carbohydrates, sugars, those enter our bloodstream. What normally happens is the pancreas secretes insulin. That insulin moves the blood sugar out of the blood into the various cells. In type 2 diabetes, there's plenty of insulin, but the cells are resistant and the insulin doesn't have the desired effect. Eventually, in late stages of type 2 diabetes, we do become insulin deficient because the pancreas basically just poops out. It's been working hard for many, many years, producing more insulin than normal, and it basically just gets old and tired. So early in type 2 diabetes, we actually make extra insulin, and if you measure insulin levels in people with early type 2 diabetes, it's very high. Late in type 2 diabetes, the opposite occurs, and the insulin levels can actually fall and be inadequate, and some type 2 diabetics end up having to take insulin somewhere late in their course because the pancreas over time just poops out, gets tired, and can't make enough insulin. Two things about type 2 diabetes that are important to know. First, the heavier you are, the more likely you are to develop type 2 diabetes. And this is really a problem in our country because not only do we have a diabetic epidemic, we've got an overweight and an obesity diabetic. Obesity running rampant in our culture, and it's largely because of what we're eating and our relatively sedentary lifestyle. So one of the things that's leading to the epidemic in diabetes is the epidemic in obesity. The other thing in diabetes is it runs in families. So if you have someone in your family that's diabetic, a sibling, a parent, an aunt, or an uncle, unfortunately, you're more likely to develop type 2 diabetes yourself. Again, certain populations are also prone to diabetes. The Pima Indians, who are a Western Indian tribe, are very, very susceptible to diabetes. Most people of Hispanic heritage are also more susceptible to diabetes and have a higher family incidence. So having a certain genetic predisposition can make you more likely to have diabetes, and the heavier you are, the more weight you carry around also predisposes you to diabetes. We're going to talk a lot about